Good evening. I'd like to call our tonight's meeting to order. First off, I will have Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Moore.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First off, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Commission. The Commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to us at this time. No correspondence? No request to speak? Okay. Correspondence and staff communications from Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Chair Perez. Two items to note tonight. You should have two memoranda in front of you. First one is regarding item number 4, which is the barn conditional use permit. And then the second one, you should also have a memo for myself, which was in, I believe, was in your packet, that we are requesting a continuance tonight on item number 7. That's the one dealing with the retail firearms zoning changes. That's all for staff communications at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any disclosure of ex parte communications from our commissioners? I'll start with Bernadette.
Yes, I had a conversation with the applicant for number 4, the barn conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Liebig.
None.
I've had communication with the number 5.
Okay, Commissioner Moore.
None.
I didn't have any either. Okay, consideration, onto the consent agenda. Consideration and approval of the minutes for the May 15th meeting.
And
Move
number
that we
2.
approve.
Sorry, and number 2, are you splitting it up?
And number 2, thank you. Could I get a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move that we approve the minutes.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back. We're voting on number 1 and 2.
Oh, number 1 and 2?
The consent agenda.
Consent agenda and the minutes, okay. Move that we, go ahead.
I'm willing to do the minutes, but I have a question on
Okay.
the Rayleigh's Field one, if we want to do that.
Okay, let's take them
sorry.
separate then. So we'll go with item number 1, consideration and approval of the minutes. Commissioner Guerrero, do we have a motion?
Move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, on to number 2, the Rayleigh Field minor wireless telecommunication facility permit.
All right. I guess my question is, why do we have to have a platform up by the little cell tower thing?
Are you referring to the screen that's where they would mount the antennas to? Because that exists presently.
Well, no, I know that. But they want to put a platform. I'm trying to think of where I'm going to tell you to look, but when you look at the back page, and they show you the cell tower and what it'll look like, and then they show that there's a platform around the cell tower. It says proposed antenna platform. Why would you have to have a platform there? Why couldn't you mount them flush against the facility?
I'm looking at the drawing now.
David, I'm on.
Yeah, I think you're on A3. Is that correct?
I don't know. I'm on this paper here.
Okay. Not certain if my applicant.
So, I mean, it makes no sense to me why we would have it extended out and have a platform on it when you could put it up against it and it would be relatively invisible to anybody.
Yeah, I'm venturing a guess here. I believe what they're trying to do is get the antennas so that they are pointed in the right azimuth. They try to angle these things in a specific direction for coverage. So,
but you have, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but you have a whole, whatever you call that screening thing. You have that whole thing that you could put them and just angle your antenna anywhere you wanted, and you could just put them all the way across there. It just doesn't make any sense to me that we would have something sticking out that would be showing.
Don't see my applicant present tonight, but my presumption is that that's how it's designed, so they can get the antennas pointed in the proper direction that they need to sort of, serve that radius. Which way the antennas point and what angle is very critical to these kinds of
Okay,
facilities.
but you understood what I told you.
Yeah,
So if you went all the way along the whole screening area, the whole distance, and you just turned those antennas a different direction, wouldn't you accomplish the same thing?
conceivably, that's something I would need to verify with the applicant.
Okay. I just think that it would be better if we made it so it wasn't so blatantly obvious you had them there, and you tried to blend them in with the screening. I think that was the purpose we always have had with this, is you try to blend them in as best you can, and by looking at that picture, they just kind of stick out like a sore thumb, and it just didn't seem like that was what we were trying to do. Okay, that was my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore.
Are you requesting a continuance on this? Is that what I'm
No,
hearing?
I don't care. I just thought that we should at least have staff say, why are we doing this? I thought the applicant would be here to tell me why it was sticking out. I don't know that we need to continue it. I mean, I think it's fine to do this. This is where they're supposed to be, or in places like this. I was just saying it should be less visible. It's less visible on the rice towers out in the port than it is here. This is just going to stick out. So I just thought we should at least talk to them. There may be a reason you have to do this, and there's no alternative, but it just seems like you have such a big area, you could just take those little antennas and make them work. So I'm not opposed to them having them, I just thought we should talk to them about making them less visible.
Well, just to be clear, too, there's going to be two of these, right? We're talking about this like there's going to be one. There's actually two of those pictures, right?
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
like to refer the commission to sheet A3 in the plans. There is a detail there of this exact area that we're referring to. And it does show how they're trying to get this certain azimuth, and that's why those are, angled in that manner, since the sunshade is a fixed location. Looks like they're actually extending them to make sure they get them in that right direction with enough separation, between the two of them. So that detail on the lower right corner of that page, I think is trying to establish, why they're mounting them in that manner, and it's to get the azimuth that they need to accomplish their coverage objectives.
Okay, so can I have a motion for the recommended action? Are we okay with this? or-
Well, yeah, I'm fine with it, but can we make just an added thing that our staff at least talk to them to see if there isn't a way to make them less visible? There may not be,
So,
and
David,
that's still where we'd want them, is on facilities like this.
on that note, if we approve this, can they modify them to be flat up against the billboard?
Well,
If you request it, is that possible?
we certainly can endeavor to see if that's possible, but, if we do approve it as is, they would not be obligated to do so,
I agree.
But they could.
if possible.
Okay, I'll move that we ratify the zoning administrator action and request that staff also talk to the applicant to see if the antenna can be made more flush to the back of the billboard, if possible.
And I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Next, we'll proceed on to the regular agenda. I'd like to bring up item number 7 first, which is the public hearing on the retail firearms and ammunition sales. It's recommended that we postpone it to our next meeting. Could I get a motion for that?
I'd move we postpone this item till June 19th.
Could I get a second?
I'll second.
First by Commissioner Moore and seconded by Commissioner Austin. All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Thank you. Next, we have the public workshop on the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan.
We have a PowerPoint on this tonight. I'm going to introduce the item and provide a little bit of context, and then Aaron Laurel and Rick Toff from the City Manager's Office are going to conduct the bulk of the presentation for you tonight. So Pioneer Bluff, is an area that we have, discussed many times at the Planning Commission, over the years, and it really represents sort of the next frontier for us in terms of our, master planning efforts to achieve some of the city's, longstanding goals to reclaim its riverfront and deindustrialize it. We have obviously done quite a bit of that in the Bridge District, and you see a lot of housing already, under construction in that area. And, so the logical progression is moving down into Pioneer Bluff, which is that area along the river that's generally just south of the Bridge District area. This area is subject to good old land use policy A10 in the city's general plan that provides guidance into how the city is to work on transitioning, this area. And this is a land use policy that's specifically applicable to only this area of our community. And it has been something that's been for the Planning Commission in different contexts, over the years. But it essentially what it says now is that the existing non-conforming uses over there are limited to ordinary repair and maintenance only. They can no longer expand, and that has been the case since 2006. That policy has been in the city's general plan since its original adoption back in 1990, and it slowly sort of got a little bit tighter and tighter as the years went by, and so up until 2006, no more expansions and no new establishment of new non-conforming uses can go in this area. Other master planning efforts back in 2003, we did the joint riverfront master plan with Sacramento. This was quite a visioning, sort of exercise, looking at sort of both sides of the river and seeing how the river can really join the two cities rather than be something that had always been considered something that divides the two. So we wanted to bring this forward to you tonight to provide you some background and context, because there will be some items in this area that will come before the Planning Commission, later this year. And so since this matter has also been taken up by the City Council, relatively recently, the City Manager staff would like to also present this to the Planning Commission so that you have some of this background when some of these other items come before you later this year. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Aaron Laurel with the City Manager's Office.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's been a while since I've been to Planning Commission. So again, Aaron Laurel, I'm the Economic Development Manager with the City, and I'm joined tonight by Rick Toft, our Port Business Manager, together working with David and another member of staff, Katie Jacobson, in the Community Development Department. We are the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan team, and as David mentioned, this is a high priority item for the Council. It actually appears on the current year's strategic plan agenda as a top priority. The goal is to get a transition plan in place by the end of the year, and really the objective of that plan is to come up with a set of actions and recommendations that will facilitate the transition to this area from its industrial use currently to mixed-use development. So very much in the same approach we did with the Bridge District in the past. We're trying to replicate that effort down the riverfront. So Pioneer Bluff is outlined in the green area here. It's 130 acres in total, representing about a mile of the riverfront, just south of the Bridge District and just north of the Stone Lock property. It's also adjacent to Jefferson Boulevard in the main rail line that bisects Pioneer Bluff from the neighborhood to the west. Historically, the Pioneer Bluff area has looked much like it does today. Actually, it was originally developed for waterborne industrial uses. Mainly, the tank farms were originated to deliver petroleum by barge. So it was actually a maritime facility originally. Then the Kinder Morgan pipeline was built, and that's how those tank farms are served today. The Stone Lock property is just off the south end of the Pioneer Bluff area. There used to actually be a land connection there. It was a major public works project back in the 60s, I believe, that put in the locks. They were just used for not very long, and they've been decommissioned for a long time, not functional. It's a unique part of the community, obviously, but has its challenges in terms of looking at the reuse. And then the city's Corp Yard and water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, the original one, is at the southern end of the bluffs. The wastewater treatment plant was decommissioned when we connected to the Northwest Interceptor, to the regional sanitation project down south, and Corp Yard is still there, so we're going to get into that quite a bit tonight. So this is what the bluffs looks like today. Very much an obvious challenge to take this area from what it looks like today to mixed-use development as envisioned by the general plan, the Riverfront Master Plan. But let's keep in mind that just 10 years ago, this is what the Bridge District looked like. Very, very much similar to Pioneer Bluff in terms of the challenges. We had rail bisecting everything. We had a lot of all industrial uses minus Raleigh Field, and a street network and infrastructure that was completely outdated and not appropriate for high-density development. 10 years later, this is the Bridge District today. A lot of what we've done there you can't see on the ground, but definitely an area that's shovel-ready for high-density mixed use as we always envisioned. And so, like I said, we're applying a lot of the same approaches to the Pioneer Bluff area as we get into this. I just want to set some context with why we're here this year and today, and why this is important to the City Council at this moment. There's been a number of things that have happened over the last 5 or 6 years that have helped us along to get to the point where we have momentum, where this transition plan is really becoming a necessary piece of realizing the vision of the general plan. So first, like I mentioned, we had the wastewater treatment decommissioning in 2007. The CIMEX rail removal was actually a Bridge District project, but it affected Pioneer Bluff because that rail line actually served the old CIMEX silos in the Pioneer Bluff area. That facility has been closed. CIMEX relocated it over by the port several years ago. And actually these silos, they're supposed to be down a while ago, but we've been working with CIMEX. The plan is that this summer, sometime this summer is what we'll commit to at this point, they'll be down, and it'll really change the look of that area and create an opportunity for riverfront development actually just at that site and just north of it. The Bridge District development, we can't ignore that just to the north of this area we're realizing development there. The first few hundred units are under construction. Fulcrum Property is building, plus Bridge Housing has an affordable project at that site. So what we see here is we're getting momentum from the north as development becomes feasible and comes online. That's only going to create more pressure for things to transition in the Pioneer Bluff area. And most importantly, out of all these factors, the Mike McGowan Bridge, what we used to call the Pioneer Bluff Bridge, the council renamed it in honor of Mike McGowan. So that crosses the barge canal between where South River Road currently ends over to where South River Road begins again on the levee. And this is a rendering of what the bridge will look like. It's under construction right now. They're going to start again in July. They had to wait for I believe some habitat issues to get back on the site. But once they're back on, they're supposed to be done by the end of November. And that will dramatically change the look and feel of the traffic on South River Road. It will go from really an industrial cul-de-sac to a north-south throughway for people who live in Southport to get to jobs in the north, and also to create that opportunity along the riverfront for future development. So the other piece of this is Village Parkway. Right now it ends at Stonegate in Southport. We actually received a grant from SACOG a few months ago to connect that roadway up to where the Pioneer Bluff Bridge will land in the Stonelock property. So the combination of those two projects will add a tremendous amount of traffic volume onto South River Road as a relief valve for Jefferson. And so that's going to be one of the themes tonight, is what we do about South River Road, both now and then looking at it in the future. The Broadway Bridge is another recent development. We did the river crossing study with Sacramento, made that a real project, and got the buy-in on both sides of the river to push it ahead. We actually got a grant from SACOG on this one as well to do a feasibility study. That's going to be starting this summer. And so what that'll do is look at different alignments and different design options for the bridge, put some preliminary engineering and cost estimates to it. It'll allow us to go to the next phase of design and engineering on the project. And really, this is something that is a priority for both sides of the river. That's a huge milestone looking at the past context of our cities working together. So the Broadway Bridge, in terms of a catalyst, an economic development catalyst for the Pioneer Bluff area is enormous. Having the direct link to Sacramento, creating another east-west connection right at that location will be a major plus for future development in Pioneer Bluff. We're also adding through this project a couple of, actually 3 stoplights, one at 15th Street. The other 2 are down by Clark Trucking and Clark Pacific, really meant to add a safety measure for trucks entering the roadway at those locations. Definitely not meant to be permanent fixes there. Those are more interim solutions. But we want to make sure that safety is a high priority on that roadway once it opens, and that's part of the design. And then the streetcar project. We think of the streetcar right now as being from City Hall across the Tower Bridge into downtown, but there's a look at the maintenance facility being located in West Sacramento. It would be under the Pioneer Bluff overpass. There's a lot of reasons it makes sense. So right now the alternatives are being weighed, but if the location is here, that creates an opportunity to run the streetcar down through the Bridge District and opens the door for connecting it into Pioneer Bluff once development is more ready to happen there. So just another factor that will drive the momentum towards a transition from industrial to mixed-use development. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Rick Toft, our Port Business Manager, who is managing this project for our division.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, Commissioners. Can we go back to that one aerial? Or that's okay. I can talk from this slide. Well, what I wanted to point out initially as we get the conversation started here is that Pioneer Bluff, Aaron mentioned it's a mile long, it's 130 acres in size. It is surrounded on 3 sides by water and rail, and since construction of the barge canal at the south end in the 1950s, Pioneer Bluff has effectively been an isolated peninsula, cut off effectively from connectivity and access to the rest of the city. That's about to change with the McGowan Bridge in the south that will provide that north-south connectivity. The other connection that is shown on this map is the Riverfront Street extension into the Bridge District, connecting to 15th Street, and the Broadway Bridge in the future that will really create that ultimate connectivity to the city of Sacramento. So this slide is good enough. What I wanted to point out on that larger aerial is just the intensity of the existing industrial operations in Pioneer Bluff. And maybe, Aaron, you can point to the 2 properties that I point out here. So all of the parcels in Pioneer Bluff, with the exception of Cemex in the north, which Aaron mentioned is slated for demolition here shortly, and then the former Calply building on the other side of the street. Those are the only 2 vacant properties in Pioneer Bluff. Every other parcel in the district is an active user. So we have an intense active industrial district, and the transition plan is really a relocation plan, a precursor to more specific land use planning. We showed a version of this, if any of you attended the general plan workshop that David conducted about a month ago over at the community center. Pioneer Bluff was one of the stations that we had available for public comment, and the theme of the public comment was when we discussed the goals of the plan, were how are you going to do that? And good question. So it's a complex project, obviously, and so we've developed a prioritized approach focused on 3 transition drivers, and we'll talk about each of these 3 here tonight. And Madam Chair, I'll leave it up to you if you want to pause after each one and maybe discuss each one separately instead of waiting till the end. So I'll start with South River Road. And as we prepare for the opening of the McGowan Bridge at the end of the year, actually November 30th, we're needing to get out in front of some safety issues that will result from through traffic and kind of that interaction with the existing industrial operation there. So we have encroachments in the right-of-way, and we have longstanding truck queuing practices, particularly related to the tank farms. We have lane configuration questions to address, and the right-of-way width is an interesting piece of this as well. So south of 15th Street to the curve, and maybe Aaron can point out that the right-of-way is 80 feet in width, and we think that's sufficient in width to develop an ultimate reconfiguration of the street. South of the curve, down to the bridge, we only have 60 feet presently. So our thought is ultimately that we normalize the width to 80 feet. And the curve itself is a little bit awkward, so there might be some realignment, minor realignment necessary, and that's related to the survey that we'll be doing to establish the levee crown, much as we did in the Bridge District to the north. It's a bluff, but it's also a levee, and there's a theoretical levee prism which needs to be surveyed, which determines the development setback line. And as we move towards the street, it will become apparent if we require any readjustment of the alignment to maximize riverfront site area for development. So those are the issues. And then again, just to reiterate, the Broadway Bridge coming into 15th Street with Riverfront Street is going to create a five-way intersection that is going to be an interesting spot. So we'll have to really look at how that intersection is going to work. The other two priorities, I'll start at the bottom with the city courtyard. That yellow shaded area is all that property is owned by the city. We operate our current courtyard facility there, and so we have an opportunity to relocate that and tee up what is really probably the cornerstone development parcel in Pioneer Bluff, and take the lead on that and actually get the transition going through our own actions with our own property. And finally, of course, the tank farm parcels. We have two primary tank farms, Shell and Buckeye. Shell is the northerlymost piece shaded in red there. Buckeye straddles both sides of South River Road, and then the related Kinder Morgan property, which is the pipeline that feeds the tank farms, comes up from the Bay Area and delivers refined product to the tank farms. So now we'll talk a little bit in more detail about South River Road. Just wanted to show you some photographs of existing conditions. The first two shots on the top there are in the south area, where the right-of-way is 60 feet, striped for 2 lanes, no bike ped facilities. You see the drainage ditches on each side, the shallow drainage. The third picture on the lower left is an illustration of that's the same location looking towards the new McGowan Bridge. Clark Trucking is the operation in the background there on the right. And then the lower right photo is the point at which the road curves away from the river, and the right-of-way goes from 80 to 60 feet. We have existing signage that mandates, one could argue, truck stacking, and that's the practice that you see on the photo on the right, where trucks queue up on the shoulder in what is actually public right-of-way and wait for their turn to load at Tank Farm. And then just a couple of shots that illustrate tanker trucks exiting those facilities and the safety issues they represent. This is the north area of South River Road, north of 15th, between 15th Street and the freeway, and this is a potential striping configuration for Pioneer Bluff with the center lane for left-hand turns. So these are the recommended actions that went to the City Council and the staff report, or in the staff report for the Planning Commission tonight. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. These are the recommendations are on the next slide. So I'll just go through the existing conditions and how we are looking to transition those. So we have the dead-end road with encroachments, 2 lanes, variable width, and a funky alignment, if you will, and quickly transitioning to a through street, which we need to reestablish and reclaim the public right-of-way, and with an eye towards multimodal facilities, a normalized width, and possibly a realignment. So the recommended actions to take us to those future conditions are address the immediate safety needs and identify parking and encroachment solutions with property owners. We have some detailed survey work underway right now. We'll be meeting. We've already had preliminary meetings with the property owners. We're going to sit down with them with property owner exhibits that show where the right-of-way is and where their encroachments are, and work with them to find solutions to those. We're going to be doing the survey of the levee, as I mentioned, and considering interim as well as ultimate roadway configurations. And then finally, this is a bit more abstract, but it's important, and that is the notion of traffic capacity on South River Road as an entitlement. And so as Southport, for example, develops and South River Road reaches its capacity, if Pioneer Bluff development lags, then the mitigation for that congestion will ultimately fall on the Pioneer Bluff property owners. So our recommendation that will probably make it into the transition plan will be an entitlement carve-out for Pioneer Bluff that supports property values, which in turn supports the efforts that we're trying to. It's a helpful tool to encourage relocation, facilitate relocation. So those are the comments on South River Road. If you'd like to discuss that before we move on, I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, I'd like to pause now and,
Okay.
and see if any of the commissioners have any questions. We'll start with Commissioner Austin.
I don't know if they're really questions, but a comment. I do appreciate looking at this as you present it to the City Council and continue to update us on the development as interim and long term. What we've established is that there's very different uses interim, both uses, zoning, et cetera, traffic capacity, compared with what the long-term vision is, which looks primarily residential with some mixed use. So I just encourage you to continue to present that to us in that manner, because I think the decisions we make in the interim will be very different than the decisions that we're going to make on the long term. One will need to feed into the other. But anyway, so those are my comments. I don't really have questions at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments specific to striping, actually. The road goes from 80 feet, then over the bridge. The bridge is being designed to equal the 80-foot.
I believe it's 90 to 94 feet in that range.
It's actually closer to the 80, I think 84 range on the bridge. But the bridge is initially being striped for 2 lanes in each direction with bike lanes.
Because of the
it's
60
built for
foot?
4.
Because of the 60-foot easement or the 60-foot right-of-way?
I think it's initially looked at for just the needed traffic capacity at the beginning. South River Road is only going to be 2 lanes for a while here, so I think the idea was with the bridge, it's initially striped for 2, can accommodate for Village Parkway, the extension project. We're actually building a 4-lane road, and I think it's yet to be determined how it's going to be striped. It's kind of the transition from suburban to urban in a way, but long term, we're looking ahead a little bit here, but we're doing the traffic model update that will inform us for the capacity needs on South River Road, but likely something that will mimic the bridge right-of-way configuration, so bike lanes, wide sidewalks, and up to 4 travel lanes, because we also want to accommodate streetcar.
Okay. Going off the theme of Commissioner Austin's comment for the interim, I see bicycles as using this path because Jefferson is horrible. To get down Jefferson past 15th, past the
South
road right
River.
there. Thank you, South River
The
Road.
South River.
They're going to turn there and use this new bridge as the path to get to the Bridge District as well as downtown Sacramento, or maybe our downtown. I would encourage striping to accommodate heavier bike traffic in the interim. So having a larger middle lane, the turning lane that feeds both directions, just means that you're going to have a narrower bike lane. So in the interim, I would actually emphasize the bike lanes for that, as that will probably be a preferred route. And that is it for as far as like roadway and striping.
Thank you, Commissioner Liebig. Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just had one question. Maybe it isn't known at this time because you don't have the final engineering done, but what do you anticipate the speed limit on that section to be? And this kind of relates to the bike question, because another problem with what Commissioner Liebig said is on the bridge itself, you have to almost get into the roadway, and it's 45 miles an hour there.
Right.
When
We don't envision 45. There's a sentiment that it should be 25 initially for safety reasons, possibly as high as 35. We're doing a traffic model update right now that will provide some inputs to that, but I think, initially we're going to be putting traffic calming devices in there. There are going to be signals. Effectively, the traffic will be moving fairly slow, and so that might be an interim situation where we have a lower speed limit than the ultimate.
Commissioner Moore?
Thank you. Yeah, I thought the presentation was very good tonight. That helps a little bit. I guess I have 2 questions. Number one, I happen to agree with the bicycle issue. I think that's going to be a major thing on South River Road, which we've never seen over there before. And then secondarily, you have recommendations here. Are you asking us to do any of this?
No.
That's good, because I couldn't figure out how we were going to do anything that says we're going to go to work on it.
We plagiarized the staff report for the council, admittedly. So those recommendations went to the council a couple weeks ago. So we have the direction we need at the council level. This is just informational for.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Thank you very much for the report and the presentation. Very helpful information. And in looking at this big picture, I'm also trying to conceptualize the timeline, seeing how far down the road we have to take a look at today, just to see what changes we need to make and in preparation for the future changes that are going to be happening. Seeing how a streetcar is coming in closely, what would that look like in preparation down the road? How can we, factor in some of these changes? So as, folks are using that today, seeing how they can build on that in the future. And maybe, the bicycles will be coming through that. I have seen it, pretty dangerous on Jefferson for folks that are going into work, commuters, and it being really busy. So in agreement with my other commissioner's recommendation that the bicycle lanes be established as well.
I can tell you, excuse me, that we're going to be doing some striping for bikes on 15th at the intersection of South River Road, and then from there north. That's in the works right now as part of the the McGowan Bridge scope, but we're certainly aware of the need for bike along South River Road from the Barge Canal north.
It just looks like a lot of changes happening, in the future, and financing for that. Just seeing how we're going to move along as we go down, any more community workshops, things like that, as you move forward, just to see how we can help in any kind of way to shape that together.
Very good.
And thank you for your presentation so far. I am curious as far as how the striping is going to go right after McGowan Bridge up to 15th, because just driving that is confusing. I've gone over to the Public Works, and it looks like the road's really, really wide, and then, when the trucks get stacked up, it's a little confusing just for a regular in-a-car driver type of thing. So thank you for this so far. So we'll go ahead and go on to the City Corporation.
Actually, yeah, just in the interest of time, we can blaze through the Corp Yard, but we want to definitely get information to you on the tank farm approach. But basically, in a nutshell, the Corp Yard relocation is a plan to, really walk the talk of the transition, looking at opportunities for site relocations, and the recommendations in your report and summarized here. But really, we're looking to move our own facilities to a modern, adequately sized new facility elsewhere in the city. So, Rick.
Could I ask a question right there? That was my one question I had, Aaron. How long do you think it would take us to decommission the wastewater plant and have everything removed and the site completely clean?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question, because it is that kind of project for the wastewater treatment plant. It was decommissioned.
Okay.
It was not demolished.
That's correct.
And, Rick can speak to the cost estimates that were done at the time, but what we're going to be looking at in general is this site as a development opportunity. So we have to do an analysis of the residual land value, the value of the property minus the demolition costs, and that'll feed into how soon things can happen and what other financing mechanisms we can bring to it.
Yeah, but I mean, we have a whole process to get, isn't that still the connection to the sewage at all?
No.
There's nothing going on there at all.
No. The only thing out there now that's active is our Corp Yard.
But we still need to tear it all out and have it removed, and I don't know if there's any soil contamination and all that involved or not. But I mean, I guess my question is, why would we worry about moving our corporate yard until we know how long it's going to take to tear all this apart?
Well,
That just seems like we're spending money when we don't need to spend money.
Well, again, we look at this as a pilot project, as the city's opportunity to lead the relocation plan. And frankly, so there's the land use issue. It's an inappropriate land use, and we have this opportunity to move out. But the facilities are functionally obsolete, and they're constrained, and they really need. The city looked to relocate in 2006 before the recession hit, and was fully prepared to do so. So they're really inadequate facilities.
I guess my only comment is, if it's going to take you 20 years to tear out the plant and make the land available for somebody to develop, why would you want to move the corporate yard early?
I think we'll go faster than that. I mean, Aaron's going to find us the money.
I mean, that's something we could talk about later, but it was going so fast I wanted to get in my comment.
And it was. I mean, it's not a small endeavor. I mean, the 2006 estimate was $16 million to demolish the wastewater treatment plant facilities. They go down below grade 20 feet, so it's a heavy lift. Okay, we keep losing our PowerPoint, but so tank farms. One of the key issues is that we want the Planning Commission to be aware of is the current ethanol by rail use permit that exists at the Buckeye facility. Shell brings in ethanol by truck, and the Buckeye facility brings it in by rail, 6 rail cars a day. You've probably all heard about the 15th Street crossing issue, and maybe even experienced it yourself. But those 6 cars that are switched every day into the Buckeye facility is a traffic congestion issue, and it's really just been a favor to Buckeye that we extend this permit over time, and staff's recommendation, we're pretty well aligned on this, is that that use permit not be extended beyond the end of this year when it expires. In general, though, these are facilities, both tank farms, that date back to the 1940s. They're outdated, they're constrained, they don't have the ability, because of Land Use Policy 10, to expand. They can only put Band-Aids on existing for existing repairs. They have existing soil and groundwater contamination, and it's really not a tenable long-term location for continued operations with everything that we've talked about happening. So our recommendations, as I just mentioned, well, I'll start at the top, but we have a direction from the council to proceed with this as a top priority. We have a site reserved at the port, but we've expanded the conversation to a regional analysis to see if there are appropriate locations, more appropriate locations in the region, not necessarily West Sacramento. The second point I just talked about, the ethanol by rail use permit issue. And then we will be conducting additional environmental investigation to move this along. And finally, our kind of final card, if relocation is not progressing as quickly as we'd like, we have the amortization study that will define a term and start the countdown clock, if you will, to when those uses have to terminate. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Commissioner Austin, do you have any questions?
Yet again, I've got a comment, but not a question. So the tank farm relocation, although I find that it's critical, I think it's also very important that we proceed wisely with that. One of my concerns is that when you are aware of who the owner is of potential contaminated sites, there aren't as many public funding opportunities. And so I think that as we consider relocation, on one hand, I think it's really important to work with property owners, but it's important just for us to think through long-term that maybe we don't want to see, for example, sales tax, property tax generating businesses relocating out of a site when we don't have a plan for how, I'm not saying that the city would take this over, but it would be just a site sitting there that's undevelopable. So I just want us to keep that in mind. So that's all that I have a comment on. Thank you.
And I can respond to that really quick.
Okay.
On the tank farms in particular, we're looking into the exact economic benefit the city derives from that. We're going to be doing the same thing for all the property owners out there, so we definitely are mindful of that comment, looking at what benefit in terms of jobs, revenue the city gets now, what it would mean for no use there. And yeah, just leave it at that.
Commissioner Liebig?
Thank you. We've been preparing for this with a series of carrot and stick approaches. Last time we voted on this was about 2008, where we approved the new tank farm over on the port, and you explained it in the staff report. There are existing constraints for the non-conforming uses, as well as the opportunities that you laid out in the staff report and in your presentation. So I think we're on the right path. It's just going to take time, and I think if staff can move forward on finding different alternatives, that's great. But again, this one is probably going to take more time than moving the city yard. So I did have one question about the additional environmental studies that you referenced. These are you proposing that the city do studies on the non-city parcels, and what would the goal of that be?
Define the issues and develop a plan for not only cleanup, but how that works into a relocation scenario.
And we've done this approach in a lot of other places in our corridor studies. We have EPA grants in the past where we, especially in the Bridge District, where we did a baseline inventory of doing phase ones for every parcel. And like Rick said, that gives us preliminary information on what issues might be out there. We can start to look at, where more serious issues are, where things might be more early to address than others, and so it's just a key piece of information as we get into potential relocations and potential development sites.
I'd be surprised if there weren't issues there. It's a tank farm that's been there for a long, long time. Part of the reason we want
a lot of that's known
off the river
so.
is because we don't want it leaking into the river. I would exercise a little bit of caution or just maybe a little restraint and be mindful that these are existing conforming businesses and I wouldn't want to be seen as pushing them out of business just because we don't want them there. This is the balance between the carrot and the stick, and I like the balanced approach. So
The vast majority of the uses on South River Road are non-conforming.
they're legal non-conforming.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Commissioner Olson?
No comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, I think it's always a grand thought that we want to have the tank farms move, and like Mr. Liebig talked about, we had that discussion with Wickland and all these people, and they decided not to move. But if you're trying to put a timetable on it, what kind of a timetable are you looking at for a tank farm? And I only ask that because we had a sign ordinance and our time limit was 25 years.
Right, I think that's the previous example of an amortization, maybe the only example of a...
It's the only one I know of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. If we end up with the amortization scenario, it's a fairly long-term scenario. So we are starting with a carrot approach. We have a site at the port. It's entitled. We have site control. We have site pricing authority and control there as well. So that's if that site is chosen by Buckeye and/or Shell, we can move relatively quickly on that. Update the environmental document, and so that would be a much shorter scenario.
Well, I mean, we're talking a steel tank. How long does it take for steel to deteriorate? We've determined that a sign deteriorated in 20 or 25 years. I don't remember, but it was a long time. Steel's 25 or 50 years?
The Shell facility is 70 years old, and
I
so
agree.
you can maintain it indefinitely. But it's a depreciation question.
And,
So-
and amortization isn't our plan per se. It's
No, I
really
know.
to
I
be
was just-
cooperative about relocation. And just really quick, also, I want to clear up one thing that we did for the council. Also, the Wickland project envisioned all 3 tank farms moving to one location at the port. That's not the model we're approaching. As we're talking to Buckeye and Shell, we're learning that their models are very different. Their business is much different, and so we could envision a scenario where we do a partial move, say one of them, not the other. They have other regional facilities that they can operate under, so there are a whole slew of options in terms of how we accomplish relocation, but we are being
And I hope we
cooperative with
look
both
at
of
all
them.
of them, Aaron, before it's over. But I guess my other one is, and since you're the resident expert of Kinder Morgan, how are you going to handle them?
Well, Kinder will go where the tank farms go.
No, that's not true now. You know better than that if you know Kinder Morgan, because Kinder Morgan's pipeline services other tank farms in the area besides West Sacramento.
Correct. It goes all the way up to Reno and up to Chico.
I don't think
So we're
out
not-
here, but it's okay.
We're not looking to relocate the Kinder Morgan pipeline. That's a piece of regional infrastructure that comes all the way up from the Bay Area.
Well, but that's not true, because when we did the new tank farm, or we did the new line coming through, we actually brought it to a location at the end of South River Road and then brought it up so that they could move that somewhat. Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of they went from a 14-inch line that had developed, it was outdated and too small.
Right.
And they expanded to a 20-inch line, which is in the same trench, essentially. It's right next to the old 14-inch
But
line.
there might be a way to move that out of there because it came up it's down right at the McGowan Bridge is where it came
It does
in
come
at,
up
I
South
think.
River Road, so,
But you still need to have a connection because it services another tank farm. I think it's Bradshaw Road. I don't think it's servicing.
That's a different line, actually.
yeah, no, we're very
So-
aware of the different Kinder
Yeah, I'm just not
pipeline
sure
alignments.
that you can move Kinder Morgan completely out of the picture, and that's
No,
why
no,
I'm
they're
asking.
going to continue to serve not just the 2 tank farms that are here in West Sacramento, but they have other regional customers.
Right.
And not to mention the refineries in the Bay Area. The site at the port is on the Kinder line, so there would be no relocation required of the line. They would just, it would be a short connection from the port site to Industrial Boulevard. And we talked about the regional issue. The pipeline runs past McClellan Park, for example. So we are looking at regional.
That might be the other one on the other side of the river, though. I'm not sure I know. But that's neither here nor there. But then my last comment is, the tank farm, I think, is just a long process. I just don't think it's going to be a short process at all unless we can come up with a brilliant idea. That's your job, to figure out how we can get them to a location off of there. We know there's contamination up there, and we know it's gone to the west and out into the, Jefferson Boulevard and stuff like that. So, that's still an issue, so I hope to God we don't buy that property. We don't need that. But there's also avenues to help take care of that through the government. But my other concern is kind of what Mr. Liebig said, is the people that are currently on the road that have businesses there. Most all of them I know, if somebody came in and offered to buy their property or help develop their property, would be happy to move somewhere. But we don't want to discourage that business. I mean, whether we talk about Clark Pacific, look what they've done. You have a business that just built the 49er Stadium. Yeah, I'd sure like to see them stick around. It seems like that's a great job opportunity, and, I just don't want us to do something silly to get rid of them.
No, we're
Or
working
businesses
closely
like
with them.
them. So, yes, we can talk about trying to develop it, but that'll come. If the city can clean theirs up and make that the starting point, other people will come, and they'll try to encourage people to sell their property and move on. But it's probably us. We probably have to be the starting thing, which is what you said in the beginning. So, anyway, I don't know how you do the amortization. It's just tough. I'm done.
Oh, it's okay. I do agree with Commissioner Moore in looking at the businesses that will be affected, and also looking at the economic opportunity we have in this area. Seeing that, we are a growing community, seeing that this could be an opportunity for our community to benefit from that area in the future. But I also would like to be cautious in working with the businesses that are there, making sure that we keep them in our community, finding ways to provide some type of incentive. And, there has been a historical, understanding as to the direction for this land use. And I think that they understand that, but I also see that our city has done a very good job in working with businesses and establishing a strong partnership as we move forward, whether it be something new that's being developed. But here we have some serious challenges on what are we going to do with where they're at today and how are we going to move things in the future. So you're just getting more of an understanding of what that looks like in the future. That would be helpful to me.
Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for the information, and hope you guys take into account all of our comments.
Chair Perez, may I suggest you ask if there's any public comments on this item?
Oh, sure. Do we have any public comment for this item? I didn't have any slips either. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 4, public hearing regarding the barn conditional use permit at 985 Riverfront Street.
Senior Planner Sandra White will present this item.
Good evening. Good evening, Chairperson Perez and members of the Planning Commission. On May 14th, the City Council authorized, they approved a resolution giving the city manager the authority to execute a lease agreement and a sublease agreement between the city and Smart Growth Investors to operate an outdoor recreation entertainment venue known as the Barn. The primary objective of this venue is to draw attention and bring visitors to the Riverwalk and the Bridge District. The city will lease 0.59 acres from the developer for a 30-year term. The terms of the lease also involve a sublease of the premises back to the developer. And as part of the terms of the lease, the developer is required to obtain a conditional use permit for the proposed venue. The lease and the sublease agreements do not become effective until the conditional use permit has been approved by the Planning Commission. The leased area will be improved with an informal outdoor event structure. The footprint of the structure is approximately 8,025 square feet, which encompasses a 5,100 square foot shade structure anchored by two buildings on opposite ends. The smaller building is approximately 780 square feet, which will house an interpretive center. The larger building is approximately 2,145 square feet, which will house kitchen and restrooms. The barn proposes to activate the riverfront with a range of events such as a weekend beer garden, culinary events, charity events, farmers markets, foot races, and music festivals. These events are anticipated to draw anywhere from 100 to 500 people on the weekends, 500 to 2,000 people for bi-monthly and or quarterly events, and up to 5,000 people for annual events. And depending on the needs and the characteristics of the various venues, temporary structures will be erected on adjacent private property owned by the developer as well. So this use permit will encompass the 5.9 acre leased area and the adjoining properties for a total of 6.84 acres. Parking for the various venues will be accommodated by on-street parking, and in Rayleigh Field parking lots, there are approximately 355 to 360 parking spaces on the street in the Bridge District, and the Rayleigh Field event parking lots can accommodate approximately 3,125 parking spaces. Special event permits, which are processed through the police department, will be required for these events. And as part of the special event parking process, the applicant will be required to address parking, traffic control, and safety. The discussion on noise needs some clarification, and I want to first point out that the Bridge District specific plan contemplates outdoor recreational entertainment along the riverfront coexisting with noise-sensitive land uses, such as residential. And secondly, the ambient noise conditions in the Bridge District is expected to exceed or already exceeds 70 LDN. And without getting too technical, that is a measurement of noise averaged over a 24-hour period. 70 LDN is the exterior noise thresholds for noise-sensitive uses, such as hospitals, residential uses. So the barn, even though the barn is not a noise-sensitive land use, however, there will be amplified events occurring on the site depending on the venue. And with that said, staff and the applicant have revised condition number 6, which you received as part of your package, which basically requires the applicant to conduct a noise study that establishes a baseline ambient noise level at the nearest existing residential area before the city issues a certificate of occupancy for the barn structure. The acoustical study would be updated every 3 years, since it is expected that conditions in the area will change as development occurs. The condition also requires the applicant to implement a noise program where amplified noise levels would not be allowed to exceed the established ambient noise level that would be documented in that noise study, or 70 LDN, whichever is greater. This concludes staff's presentation. Since all the findings can be made for this project, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, find that the Bridge District Specific Plan Supplemental Environmental Impact Report is the appropriate level of environmental review for the project, and that none of the conditions requiring additional environmental review described in CEQA Guidelines 15162 exist, and approve the requested conditional use permit subject to the findings and conditions as identified in the staff report. And the applicant representing Fulcrum Smart Growth Investors is available in in the audience and would like to make a presentation as well. And the staff is also available to answer any questions that the Planning Commission may have.
Thank you, Sandra. Would any of the commissioners like to address the staff before I open the public hearing? No? Okay, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Do I have any requests to speak?
No, we have none.
Okay. Would the applicant please come up?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having us tonight to talk about the barn project. We have a couple of options. Either I can give you a quick description of what the barn aims to do, because the overall form factor of the barn is a curious thing, and you might like some background on that. If you feel like you know enough, then I'm happy to start off by answering questions you have very specifically.
We'll see what you have.
Okay, very good. All right, we have some slides. I'm assuming that these are brought up in your screens as well. Okay. I'll give you a little bit of a background, a story that explains how it is that we arrived here. Being that we're involved in developing the area right around Garden Park, it's typical for us when we have designers, colleagues, interesting people come through town that we bring them over to the Bridge District and show what's going on here because we think it's really special. And one time we had an opportunity to bring a very special designer over to the site, and we walked down the Riverwalk. His name was Jerry Van Eyck. He's a Dutch landscape architect, which in the Netherlands means, to some degree, a very different thing than what landscape architecture means here. Meaning that the complete discipline of landscape design is water resource planning, engineering, horticulture, the whole bit. It's a fairly interdisciplinary discipline, as it is in the Netherlands. And as we were walking down the Riverwalk, Jerry stopped me and said, "Stephen, I just want to point out one vulnerability here in the way that Riverwalk's been executed, because whereas it did, this amazing thing to develop, almost a mile long a river frontage, so that people can bike and run dogs and exercise and all that in the riverfront. What you have is essentially a border with Riverwalk, meaning that on one side you have the natural riparian ecology of the river, on the other side you have the organized geometry of the neighborhood. And he said, what I would encourage you to do is think about creating a couple of instances where the wilds of the river could be perceived as leaping over and locking fingers with the neighborhood. Because once you do something like that, you create a place that honors our place on the river. And we took that comment seriously, and we started asking ourselves, if we were to create a building which hadn't previously been contemplated in our plans for developing these parcels, what would it be and what value would it be? The value became clear at the outset, because part of the frustrations that we had in our work in the Bridge District was there was a lot of interest in what was going on in some of these larger project sites over in the Sacramento side of the river, and whenever someone, whenever there was a scent that someone was going to think about buying a site, they would be on the front page of the big newspapers around town. But when we're actually building something over on this side of the river, it's like barely mentioned. And what we're doing over here is great. And so we thought what we ought to do is we ought to find a way to maximize the investment that the city's made in the Riverwalk and develop a use that would bring people right to the water's edge. Because what's fantastic and special about this place is that it is possible to sit outside, to have a meal, and have a direct line of sight to the water. Now, you might say that happens in one other place or a couple other places in the area. And in those cases, sometimes the overall aesthetic appearances, period, references our history, that sort of thing. And that's appropriate and necessary. But what we thought, since what we were aiming to do with the Bridge District is to really answer the question, if we had the opportunity to build a whole new neighborhood in the city that's city density, right in the heart of the city, right part of the downtown core, what would it be like? How would it answer to our values in the 21st century? And so what we thought was, if we're going to build something here that's an attraction to stimulate patterns of traffic and bring people here to see what it is that's going on in the Bridge District, then what it ought to do is it ought to relate to the water, right? To sort of say, yes, at one time, the reason that Old Sacramento's there is because the water was the highway for, a different era. But now, when Sacramentans rank what is most important to them, they'll say the recreational asset of being in the river area, right? The American River Trail, being on the bike, riding, etc. And we have that extension here, and we really want people to know that. The second thing is that if we thought it was important to, in some ways, make an identity statement that really belonged here, and that is that how could we honor our agricultural heritage but bring it into the 21st century? And we wanted to do that by introducing a food program, meaning that of these two pieces that actually touch the ground, the larger one is the kitchen. There is no interior seating. It's all window service. I don't like to use trade names of other companies, but imagine if a Tasty Freeze made a menu of really simple items, but exquisitely prepared in a way that it honors a Northern California culinary tradition and the experiences that we value today. Meaning that you walk up to a window, you place an order for food, you go sit down, then it's brought to you, and it's a really lovely experience. We thought that that was really something that could happen on every weekend where the weather's fine out in the Bridge District. And the other side of it, where it touches, we wanted to make an interpretive center. We're choosing the word interpretive center as a kind of working title because we don't want it to be perceived as sales office, because it isn't intended to do that. What interpretive center does is it's an opportunity once you have an audience of people to say, this is what's going on in the Bridge District. These are the values that all of the decisions that are beginning to be made visible and tangible answer to. And they're thoughtful decisions that have been made about developing at a city density with a meaningful relationship to outside in a way that answers to our sustainable and environmental considerations inherent in building in the 21st century. And so we see that as an opportunity to tell that story in a way that is otherwise stuck on a web page or stuck on a sign and abbreviated in bullet points on sales materials. There's a much bigger story to tell. So in short, that at a minimum is what the barn intends to do. And if you ask the question, why is it like this? Why is it this shape? Somewhat of the answer is we did want to sort of take these elements of our collective heritage and bring them into the 21st century. The second thing is that we were really interested in, we didn't set out necessarily to try to design something that was iconic in that sense, in the big capital I sense, right? But we did try to design something that would be memorable and be fascinating to people to come and experience. This is a structure that is all curves, but there are only 8 curved pieces. Everything else is straight cut members. This is a structure that no matter where you are as you walk around it, it is a different object. There are no two views of it that are the same. The silhouette is always changing no matter where you are around the thing. Third is that what do you need if you really want people to have an experience next to the river? You need to provide shade. And so that is the rationalization for this building form. If you look at it and imagine it as a diagram, what you see is that it's actually a bridge on land. The 2 footings and a major span that creates an overall drip line of 8,200 square feet. Better than 5,000 square feet of that is basically just outdoor shaded area. And so the greater balance is actually outdoor space that's created and very little indoor space. If this is on the riverfront, right on Riverwalk, then it can be other things too. The next scale larger. It's the perfect place to start or finish a foot race or a bicycle race. Perfect place to have events, charity events, farm to fork events, those sorts of things. And in the larger scale, which I imagine is probably more relevant to the Bridge District in the early years as we're trying to gain traction and gain awareness so that people, when you say the word the Bridge District, people know where it is and what it is. Big events where we might have festivals that bring together a lot of different experiences. Music is surely one of those experiences, although we're not expecting to do concerts in the proper sense of the word, meaning that you pay a ticket for one act and have the concert and then go away. But rather festival-like spaces where there's a lot of different program elements interacting. There might be music, there might be design, there might be fashion, there might be prompts, exhibits, things that talk about city, what it means to come back to the city, if we need to tell that story to those who live in the suburbs. So those are, when we put together the project materials, I know that you received a copy of this, but in one of your exhibits there's a set of diagrams that label it as small, medium, and large for different scales of events. We have a good idea about what the opportunities are in all those scales, but we don't. It's not exactly fixed in our minds what those different implementations might be. So, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them as well as I can. But I'm appreciative for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the backstory of this because we're really proud of the outcome.
Do you have any questions for the applicant?
This is mostly just out of curiosity. Thank you again for the presentation and for bringing something really unique and iconic to the Bridge District. So it seems to me that your expertise is really focused on development rather than event planning. And I'm just wondering if you could, it's not really the purview of the Planning Commission just to entertain me. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, are you planning on hiring a firm to do that? Is this going to be an ongoing thing? So I'm just curious about programming.
Well, nothing's finalized today. It would be premature to do that insofar as we don't have a lease agreement with the city. But we have had conversations with a few operators in town that we think are very strong candidates, not only because of their ability to deliver on menu items, but because of particular genius that they have for audience development and event planning. And so we're in some ways looking for a silver bullet, so to speak, find someone who would actually operate the kitchen but has an interest in doing events at a variety of scales and accommodating a range of things happening there. And we're feeling really good about the possibilities and the potential partners that we have on deck to talk to once we have the agreements in place.
Follow up, are you looking at folks who are local or
yes,
national?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
No, we are only considering local operators at this point.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Commissioner Levick.
Is this going to be an enclosed area? In other words, if you're looking to, let's say, lease the space out or have somebody else running it, there's going to be, again, there's financial interests. So is this a fully enclosed area, or is this going to be more open, like, I don't want to say park, but part of the river walk, river experience?
We're insisting that it be perceived as being part of the public domain, meaning that if you imagine the earlier view that was shown there, it's in some ways and from at least two angles a gateway, right? And from that point of view, it's a prompt to say, if you're going to come into the Bridge District, you come in through that gate. If you're going to leave, you go out that gate. And so, whereas we want people to circulate there, if there's alcohol being served as part of the program for the operator, they'll have to find a way to, construct a fence around an area without blocking access under the structure so that people feel like they can still participate in the space. And that's really, really important to us that be preserved.
Thank you.
Commissioner Olson?
Thanks for the presentation there. Really gave us a vivid idea of what the potential uses of this project are for, and I thank you for that, and congratulate you on a great design there. It's very impressive. Really, kind of the concern that I had is, and you kind of alluded to this when you said it's going to be perceived as a public, open, public space, when it's not in use for anything. Is there going to be somebody there? I mean, explain that to me.
Sure. One in the S scenario, the small scenario, of course we recognize that it's not reasonable to sort of get an operator on a hook and then have them be there to staff it Monday through Sunday every day at night, even when possibly there's not a lot of traffic out there at the beginning. And so the operation will scale, as you suggest. There will be times when the operator won't be technically present out at the site. But the way that we've designed and the way that we're looking at the site plan now to protect, the interests that Mr. Alibig mentioned, we think that, this is going to stand on its own in the same way that other public structures stand on their own. Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, a sort of sculptural piece that organizes activity. The site will be adequately lighted. We've had discussions with the fire department and the police department about what their wishes were to be able to circulate in and around the structure so that they can keep an eye on it, at night and things like that as they're doing their normal patrols for the area. So we think that we have a good approach for managing the space even when there isn't anyone out there. Ultimately, if I can add one more thing, I'm sorry. Ultimately, one of the objectives is to bring activity of more people out to the river, because insofar as we're able to at certain times, bring more eyes to the waterfront, bring more activity to the waterfront, it simply discourages undesirable activity. So we think that this is a step in the right direction on that score.
Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Moore?
I think this is a great idea. I love the idea. I guess I have a couple of questions for you. Is this the final thing that's going to be on this property for the next 50 years?
Well,
or is this like a temporary thing till something bigger and better comes along?
The way we sited the barn when we thought about it in plan, I don't know if there's an illustration in the materials that are in the deck. I think there were 6 slides. The lease that has been talked about between us and the city is for 30 years. And so the idea is that when we sited the barn and we talked about the different scales of activities that could go around it, if we go back to the S or the medium scale, that would be probably best. Yeah. The idea was, I'm sorry, is this a pointer actually? No, it's not. It's not a pointer. The idea was that we shouldn't block any moves for surrounding development on the 2 parcels that we own to the north and to the south. Because what we could do then is, if we built around the barn, not right up against it, but giving it some space as a sculptural object, we could produce other, program prompts on the ground floors of buildings, other restaurants and things like that, to really bring the culinary emphasis to this place. And so we've thought ahead, and we're very specific about where the best place of the barn was, so it didn't block moves, and ended up being the sort of the centerpiece of a set of buildings, once they're all realized.
So then the city owns this parcel of land that this is going on? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, that's.
And then Smart Growth owns the parcel on either side of it?
I'm going to defer to Katie Jacobson.
I guess. You can't tell me if you own it or not, I guess. Okay.
It's private property except for the Universal Street, the Riverview Access Corridor is currently got an easement, a city easement across it for continued public access to the riverfront. So the city's going to be, under the terms of the transaction, leasing back from Fulcrum the area in the dotted red line, and then we will, they'll make the improvements on it. So the lease is for park purposes, essentially. However, to your question, there is a provision that allows, should the developer decide 10 years from now that they have a different development plan for that area, then they have the option to come in and ask that it be terminated Their CUP would be terminated at the same time, and they would pay back to the city the unamortized value of its public investment. So it's a lease for park purposes. So that's why it has
Let's
park.
start over again. Do we own this property, or does Fulcrum own this property?
This is all private property.
So we're going to lease this property from the developer.
Correct.
I have no idea why, but that makes no sense to me.
It's-
So we're
it's-
going to lease it from the developer, and he's going to lease it back from us?
Right, because essentially, I think you were here, if you remember, when we were presenting the park section of the Bridge District specific plan. There's a section of neighborhood parks called distributed park elements, and it provides for, because it's an urban area where land is, very valuable and costly, it provides a mechanism for there to be created these quasi-public private spaces that have public easements across them and for park purpose.
I mean, just for
and
the
for the
heck of
city
it.
to contribute public funds towards those improvements.
Just for the heck of it then. So we're leasing it from them, they're leasing it back from us, correct?
Correct.
Does this cost us money?
There's a CFD 27
I don't know
investment.
what that means.
There's an assessment district that the property owners have formed. Again, the Bridge District's very public-private funding mechanisms. So the owners formed CFD. They put assessments on their property to pay their fair share of all these public improvements that are happening out there. So there's CFD 27, their assessment district funds remaining from the improvements, the roadways and all the improvements that you've seen going on out there. And those funds are being invested in this distributed park element.
So in other words, this is costing us money for them to build this project?
But
But
yes.
it should be funded from the other property owners?
It's
somewhat.
all assessment district funding.
Okay. Well, I guess since you want to answer these questions, I thought the original gathering point for the Bridge District was going to be further down towards Rayleigh Field.
The plaza.
The plaza.
Yes.
Thank you. So what happened to the plaza now?
The Bridge District specific plan, the plaza is a backbone element of the Riverwalk, and nothing about this distributed park element at this point in time is changing the scope of that. However, right now, the plaza, the legal agreements that govern when the plaza will happen have to do with when the property owners are ready to build retail around the plaza. At that point in time, it triggers that public funding to come in and build the plaza. So because it takes a certain population to drive that retail development, and that we don't think we'll reach that level of resident or employee population probably for 15 years, this is a way for us to get a near-term development that is, the public benefit of it is really activation of the Riverwalk. We have, vandalism and things going on, and it's very important for us to get eyes on the Riverwalk, get activity on the Riverwalk. So this is something that can happen near-term and immediately, and there is significant private investment from the landowner coming into this amenity. It's not being
Well,
100%
I'm sure this costs
funded.
a nice penny to build, and that's their job. Our job is just the property, correct?
We're making a contribution of roughly 50% of the total cost of all of the improvements, including the structure.
How do we benefit? How do we get our money back?
It's similar to, it's a park element along the Riverwalk. It's fundamentally important for public safety and for revitalization of the Bridge District that we activate the Riverwalk, that we have eyes on the Riverwalk, that we get additional uses on the Riverwalk as soon as possible. So this is a way to do that. And it's contemplated and provided for in all the governing documents.
Okay. So we don't have any benefit. They're the only ones that'll benefit from this, is what you're telling me. They're going to have all the benefits, they're going to get all the income.
I expect
And
to
all
benefit
we're
from
going
this.
to do is spend money
Well,
to
it says-
provide this?
It says in this lease, we get 10 events annually at no cost.
So
I know, but I mean, that's.
Just as a reminder to the Planning Commission, the lease agreement has already been approved by the City Council and the Commission's
I'm
jurisdiction.
fine with the whole thing, I'm just
Okay,
asking a
it's
question
with,
now.
we just have to stick within the discussion of the conditional use permit, which is properly before you tonight.
Okay. We won't talk about finance. So I guess my question comes back though, and I still haven't figured out if we've moved the plaza area, what happens to the plaza? Should we all of a sudden have somebody decide to develop all around that where we can build the plaza? Do we have an out in this venue? They have an out if they want. Do we have an out in it? A way to get out of it?
The option would trigger the developer to pay back the city for its investment. So we do not have that option to trigger that. However, the plaza financing and funding is being protected, and this will not draw away from the plaza.
Okay. I'm sorry to ask that question.
Commissioner Guerrero.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. First, I recall back when I was in the Economic Development Advisory Commission, seeing future plans for this area and finally seeing it come to fruition with a structure in place and all of the thought that went behind this, how it's integrated with our river and the environment. It is beautiful. It looks really nice. I just want to compliment you on the work you put into this, and thank you for that. I think it's going to be definitely a draw, both for our residents, even not just locally, but maybe and obviously in other areas, because it's extremely unique and, like you had said, something that you would find as a sculpture. It is going to be that draw. I strongly anticipate that's going to be the case. In addition to that, maybe, it will. As I was, I walked around and I can envision seeing our businesses interested in finding a way to invest and being more mobile to be a part of that in the future. So I'm really excited about that, and hopefully seeing revenue come in our sales tax as a return for our money. And in our investment. So I think that we have quite a bit of land out there. And also taking a look at the bike trail, the pedestrian bike trail, wanting to make sure that stays preserved, because I see some overlap in that area, that it always remains open. But I think that was also part of the vision, where we have our residents that can just come in by bicycle and or nearby, walk and have access to the vicinity. When there's something going on and when there's nothing going on, maybe have a picnic out there, because it is really beautiful. And I'm glad that something is going to be developed for them to use. Can you answer that question right there, just to see what your vision is for the bike pedestrian use?
Well, the barn in its siting was very particular about keeping a distance from Riverwalk improvements that have already been completed, because we didn't want to interrupt or interfere with investment that's already been made. And so the goal really was to connect in the most sensitive way to that, to make this perception that it is a pedestrian link into the neighborhood. What's especially nice about it is that both from Riverwalk, looking into the neighborhood, because this is on axes where Garden Park is. So the park is long; it runs east to west in the longer length. What's interesting about it is that looking through the barn, you have this uninterrupted sight line, of park-like space that goes really deep into the neighborhood at Garden Park. And that connection is a really important one, and one that we sought to protect. Similarly, looking the other way from Garden Park, you have this uninterrupted sightline all the way out to the water's edge. And this is an important idea for us, because in some ways, I can only speak for the areas that we're working on developing as part of Smart Growth Investors. But when we were looking at the challenge of designing at a city density, we added to that another challenge, which was to design at a city density, but to protect a meaningful relationship outside. And so I think that what we're doing with the barn is emblematic of that, because we are bringing a lot of people, but we aren't suppressing the perception of nature. We're actually trying to valorize it in this move.
Good. And one of the other questions I have is regarding the noise concerns. I see that there are some townhouses that are being built there today right across, and just making sure that's just right there next to the area, addressing the noise. I see we have a updated memorandum changing certain areas of the conditions, and if you can just speak a little bit more about that. I know that if there's going to be a hotline, there's going to be some way for somebody to contact, and it will be immediately responded to.
Let me say first, and I'll talk about the memorandum in a moment, but let me say first that the company I work for, its interests are in developing and holding property. Now, around Garden Park, there are for sale units. And but around the periphery, it's at least our plan today is that they're mostly rental properties that we will hold for the long term, and so we inherently have a customer service issue that we will be well served to be mindful of the disruption that's caused by events at the barn to the resident base, because it's our residents who will be affected before anyone else's residents. Even to the point that as we are executing on sales contracts for the townhomes that are being built now around Garden Park, there is on page 22 a disclaimer that says, essentially, as if you didn't notice, you are moving to the city, right? There is a baseball field there, and we go through this all the time with every buyer. There will be fireworks. There will be traffic disruptions. This is the city. You're going to have these. You're going to notice other people around. And the funny thing is that, since our exposure, to the residential market has largely been in Midtown, Sacramento to date, we are confident that there's a market for people looking for those experiences. And so we don't think that's a disadvantage in any way. And as a customer service policy, we will actively manage it. Because even after we sell the house, anyone else who's involved in real estate would know that our relationship with that buyer is going to last for 10 years, just because of warranty exposure there. So, the second thing about the stipulations or conditions more specifically, the reason that you find the wording that you do in the document is that the Bridge District specific plan mentions 70 decibels over day and night as an average. When we began talking about this, we recognized that most likely taking audio measurements out there today, with the traffic and without there being buildings there to block the traffic noises, that we're probably above that. And so that was the reason that we worked with the city staff to basically say what would be a bad outcome in this would be that we can't exceed the current ambient noise levels in the district for events. It'd be like we're going to have an event, but everybody whisper. So we just said, well, we're going to take a reading, and then if whatever's greater, if the ambient noise is less than 70, which is, sort of baked into the specific plan, then we'll use 70. If it's greater than 70, then we'll use that number as the number not to exceed, because that's the ambient noise that's on the site. That's the thinking behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is so exciting to see this type of structure go up. I was at the music festival in Old Sacramento, and I parked over by Raley Field. And when I walked back, it was about 11:30 at night, And I just could imagine what it would be like to see our riverfront, just as exciting. So when this came up, and I saw it on the news and in the papers, it was just kind of like, oh, this is great, this is our next step. So thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Since I didn't have any requests to speak, I will close the public request to speak. I'll close the public hearing. And do we have any questions for staff, commissioners? Commissioner Liebig?
I just have a comment. Thank you. I realize this took a lot of work by our city staff, and I think this is an example of great cooperation between the city and the developers in the Bridge District. It's also a great opportunity that will benefit our community. And without talking finance, I think it was a good investment. It's a fantastic project to energize the riverfront and expand our commitment to local vendors and with using community involvement. So thank you so much.
Commissioner Olson? Any questions for staff or
No.
comments? Commissioner Moore?
My comment was, I didn't mean to disrupt things. I just didn't understand how all this went together, and then I didn't realize what we were doing. I still think the venue is absolutely perfect. I just didn't understand how we went from the one spot at the plaza to this and how it was going to play together. That was my real question. I still think that this will draw more people to West Sacramento than anything we have in the area right now. I think it's a great idea. I think, I'm tickled to death that Mr. Friedman decided to spend his money here and not all of it at Arco Arena, so I was glad to see that. So I think that we're going to benefit completely from this idea. I just didn't understand how it all came together. And my only staff question was, what's happening with the venue at Rayleigh Field where they wanted to put in their, they were going to have that site where they were going to have concerts and things? Is that still in the mill, or?
No, those entitlements expired, a couple of years ago. There hasn't been any talk about that in quite a while.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. I was just curious. Okay. Other than that, I just want to let you know, I do think this is going to be a real benefit from the area, and I think it may attract people that will actually get people wanting to invest in the area, and I think it'll help. So, thank you.
Commissioner Guerrero?
I just have one additional comment regarding the draw that we will see in the future and getting the crowds in easily and out quickly, just for ease of the traffic flow. And also environmentally, to trying to keep it clean, looking at public transportation options in the future, maybe a little more information about that as we move forward.
Streetcar will go right to the front door of this facility.
Okay. That'll be good. That's all I have.
Thank you. I don't have any questions or comments for staff, so I would look to a motion to approve.
I would like to move the recommended action with the revised conditions for condition number 6.
A second.
So Commissioner Liebig first and Commissioner Guerrero second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. It's been passed. Thank you.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the City Clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
On to agenda item number 5. Public hearing regarding a variance to the street side setback for an existing fence located at 1639 Virginia Avenue.
Associate Planner Kathy Allen will present this item.
Good evening, Chair Perez and members of the Planning Commission. This item is a request for a variance to the street side setback for an existing wood and wrought iron fence. The property owners received a notice to abate from code enforcement back in February, and because of that, the applicant submitted the variance application on March 14th. The application was deemed complete on April 30th. The property where the fence is located includes an existing residence, detached garage, and secondary unit, all which were constructed in the 1950s. Due to the location of the existing garage, it is impossible for the property owner to utilize what would be considered a traditional rear yard at the property. The fence that was constructed was put in that location to allow a safe play area for children on the property. Staff has reviewed the project and, in terms of the findings, has determined that the project does not constitute a grant of special privilege due to the fact that the garage is sited in a conforming location on the property as opposed to the majority of similar garages located in the area, which are sited closer to the street and can thus provide a location for a rear yard. Staff has determined that special circumstances do exist due to the placement of the garage and the inability to locate a rear yard in the traditional location. That concludes staff's presentation. Staff respectfully requests that the Planning Commission conduct the public hearing and approve the variance subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions. The applicant is also in the audience should you have any questions for him. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open the public hearing, do I have any questions for staff? No. Okay, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come up? If we have questions.
Yeah, okay.
Just state your name.
Yes?
Just state your name.
Oh, Robert Eldridge.
Hello, Mr. Eldridge. Do the commissioners, I don't have any requests to speak, but do the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Eldridge?
You know, I'll bring it up since you're up here. It is a 6-foot fence right along the sidewalk, correct? I haven't seen it. I wasn't able to see pictures.
I didn't hear that. You have to speak into there because I can't hear real good.
It's a 6-foot fence immediately adjacent to the sidewalk.
Yes, it is.
Has the staff addressed potentially bringing the height of the fence down? And would you be willing to do that?
The problem with that is the reasoning for the fence is kind of like a backyard setting, but it's a courtyard. And so it's someplace where the family who lives there can go in privacy and barbecue or whatever and have their kids come out and play in a backyard that's safe where nobody can see them except the people who live there. So that's the reason. If you bring it down to 3 foot, there is no privacy. It's not like the privacy of your backyard.
Any other questions?
I have questions for staff after.
Okay. I just had one question on your drawing that you submitted.
Yeah.
So it's just, I wasn't able to drive by the house either, but it's just covers where the house is. It doesn't cover the corner, correct?
No, it
Okay.
doesn't.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's it?
That's it. Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and do we have any questions or comments for staff? Commissioner Austin? No? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Yes. I did have a chance to drive by and take a look at it, and I noticed it was a pretty narrow sidewalk. And my only thought, seeing my fence get blown over a couple of times from some rough wind, and there may be some wind. The wind may not be as bad in that part of town because there's more housing and things like that. But looking at it from a future standpoint, if say the owner moves and it's not kept up appropriately, what can we do as a precaution or any measures to make sure that it's maintained safely, because it's butting up against the sidewalk, and I just don't want to see any of the pedestrians get hurt or anything by that.
I think the property maintenance provision in Title 19 of the city's municipal code would address those matters in terms of on-site property maintenance. If things aren't maintained properly, that is something that is actionable by code enforcement. And so it's a general consideration for property maintenance overall. So I think that would be applicable to even to this fence here.
Okay, good. Thank you. That was my only concern and question. Thank you.
Commissioner Moore, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I kind of have a comment. And this issue over in that particular neighborhood or general vicinity is very common. There's probably 100 fences in that neighborhood that are on the sidewalk, on a side yard. And, you know, while we're dealing with this one particular location, it might be wise that sometime in our future we look at the entire area and see what's out there, because there are tons of fences that are on the sidewalk. Legal or illegal, they're still there. And have been ever since we've been a city. So I think it's something we need to at least look at in our general plan update, or whenever we do it, David. I'm not sure when that is.
I understand where you're coming from, and having been through that neighborhood, you do notice, various non-conforming fences in various shapes and sizes, and, the most ideal way to do it would be to address it more comprehensively, in that neighborhood rather than sort of on a lot-by-lot, basis. And so that if that's something that can be put ultimately onto our work program, it is something we can look on more comprehensively, in the future.
Anything else? Commissioner Olson?
Just along with that, whenever it's someone's effectively their backyard, as Mr. Eldridge indicated in here, I think we could be more lenient too.
And in this particular matter, variances are always tough here because we don't have a lot of topographical issues to deal with in our community. And so in this particular case, and looking at the other properties, particularly other corner lots in this area, it did seem like the typical configuration is that their garages are much, closer to the sidewalk, albeit non-conforming, and still yielding some level of backyard on these properties. Again, I'm speaking principally of corner lots. This is one particular case where their garage is actually located in a conforming location, but it means that they really have no rear yard, in this particular property. So in our estimation, that really represents the special circumstance that could justify your approval of this variance.
Commissioner Levy, anything?
Actually, I have a hard time finding special circumstance with this, especially, I do understand the location of the garage, but there's also on the same property a place for RV parking and the bungalow, and I do understand that this house was, however, built a long time ago. If the main concern is privacy, I would also question it. I'd be willing to go to like a 4-foot fence, but having a 6-foot fence right up against a sidewalk is something that we haven't included in our ordinances, and I think there's a reason for it, especially when you have houses across the street that will be looking right at that fence just across the sidewalk. So I might differ from the other commissioners on this one, but I can't support the findings. So.
Did you have any to add? Okay, I didn't have a problem with it. So I guess I would look to a motion, or Commissioner Guerrero.
Can I just add a little more? In looking at the yard, it looked like it was well used. And it's this very small yard with a nice patio set, where I think family does gather outside. It's it's a very the homes are all in small lots from what I looked at, so there's not a lot of outdoor space for these homes. So I was able to see the justification for trying to have something, for privacy. Maybe painting it or something so that it's more aesthetically appealing. Doing something so that it's preserved nicely for a period of time, whether it be just staining it or something. But other than that, I think I was able to see the justification for it, for the purpose of the family that resides there, for them to have a place outdoor to, just enjoy, outdoor entertainment, or for the kids and things like that. because there's not a lot more going on. It's a home. There's not a lot more going on the outside for a family to be able to enjoy the outdoors privately. I just wanted to add that information.
Yeah, I agree with you, Commissioner Guerrero, especially since it's just the small section in front of the house. I'd have an issue if it wrapped around the corner of the, the yard or something like that. The visual difference between a 5-foot and a 6-foot, to me, from standing from across the street, isn't that big of a deal. The 4-foot would be big and would really take away a lot of their privacy for that. So I'm okay with the 6-foot. I'd look to a motion to approve this. Do I have any?
I move that we approve this.
Commissioner Guerrero, can I have a second?
You have a roll call vote, please.
Okay, we'll start with Commissioner Guerrero.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Liebig?
Nay.
And Commissioner Austin?
Yes.
Yes. And a yes for me.
Thank you.
If I heard correctly, the motion passed 5-1.
Yes.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission's matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the City Clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you. On to item number 6.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
I'm going to need to abstain from this item as we have a home located probably within about 500-600 feet of this property.
Okay.
So I'm going to adjourn for the evening.
Thank you for your time this evening.
Better hurry, that kettle corn is packing up right now.
Associate Planner Kathy Allen will present this item as soon as Commissioner Moore has left the building.
This item is a workshop on a proposed tentative subdivision map and conditional use permit for the creation of a 16-lot subdivision. The project is located at 204 to 218 4th Street and 221 5th Street and is located on 6 lots. The project would include 22 units, 12 of which would be single-family homes and 10 which would be half-plex units. The half-plex units will be located on the end units of the project. The parcel sizes would range from .042 acres to .065 acres, and the unit sizes are proposed to range from 1,375 square feet to 2,063 square feet. And the units will either be 2 or 3 stories in height. The project is proposed to include varying elevations to create a diverse-looking facade. Decks and balconies on the project will be in varying locations so that each unit can have as much privacy as possible from its neighboring units. The exterior facades will be eventually subject to design review and will be required to conform to the criteria set forth in the Washington Specific Plan. There is going to be common areas between the fronts of the units. That space will include elements such as a rain garden, which is intended to capture rainwater in the winter and return it to the aquifer. There will also be a gazebo area, which is intended as a gathering space for the residents of the complex. The layout of the project, one of the elements is that they will be using the alleyways located on the north and south ends of the projects for access. All of the units will have garages off of the alleyways. The single-family units will also have an exterior parking space that's off the alleyway. the half-plex units will each have a tandem garage. Guest parking is intended to be located on either 4th or 5th Street. Wanted to let you know the applicant and his design team are in the audience. They do have a presentation for you. And this concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have questions for the applicant, they'll be happy to speak to you on your concerns. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for staff? I'll just bring up the applicant. The applicant like to come up? Applicants.
Good evening. My name is Steve Howell, and I am the president of the applicant, First Capital Communities. We are bringing forward this 16-unit project. We have our architect, our landscape architect, and our engineer present to take you through what I think is an excellent plan that they've thought through, and we would be glad to discuss the components of the design and answer any questions that you would have. And I believe we have the ability to give you a view of it so that you're more familiar with what we're doing.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Craig Hausman. I'm with Hausman Architecture in Sacramento. A few corrections just to start off with. First, it's 17 units, really, that in terms of buildings themselves, and 5 of them, not 10, are half-plexes. There'll be 2 units per half-plex, but just to kind of get those numbers right. Really, the focus of the development when we started looking at how to do this project was 3 things. First, density, to try and get a suitable density for what is really this very close to urban space, and yet not have it be too overwhelming. Second has to do with dealing with both vehicular as well as pedestrian interaction, so we have that. And thirdly, massing, which we tried to really address. Can we have the next slide? Or can I drive? That. Okay. So looking at the picture here, we obviously have 4th Street to 5th Street, and there are existing alleys to the north and the south. Early on in the options, we looked at studying having a center loaded, where now you see the pedestrian walkway. We actually opted to try and address most of the vehicular circulation outward towards the alley. The advantage of that really comes down to activating the alleys, which are otherwise fairly dead at this time, and also more activity on the alley makes for a lot more safer alleys, to be honest. At that point, we are required to have a 1 car per dwelling unit. These are all single-family homes except for the half-plexes, of course, which are, we have 12 single-family homes. Even though they're on 0 property lines, they still are single-family, single parcels. And the reality is that 1 car really doesn't cut it. So looking at how to address 2 cars and not push everything to the off-site parking was kind of our goal. We looked at, instead of doing something like a carport, we looked at having a parking area. So if we switch to the next slide, we'll come back to that landscape slide when Keith has a chance to go through how the landscape plan works. So here are 2 units that are side by side. These are basically the single-family units. And as you can see, we've got garages as well as these parking areas that we were talking about. And I'm going to use my little laser. So with that, the alleyways really become your day-to-day in and out for the vehicles. Obviously, garages are important in that, unlike, say, with the parking areas, you have the ability to also put bikes, skis, all those things that really we've gathered as a society that's just a norm.
Just one quick thing.
Yeah.
I can't, I'm not looking back there, I'm looking at our screen here.
Okay.
Is there a way maybe you can point it out on the screen? Because I see that, I see where you pointed
Oh,
out
there
the
you go.
alleyway.
Look at that.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Happy hand. Okay, So, no more lasers. So on each of these are all zero property line, zero property line. So we looked at having a garage as well as this parking area. Obviously, the garage is a no-brainer. The parking area becomes more of that flex space that will also be, it's not going to be paved per se. It's going to, we're looking at Hollywood strips and some other solutions for that paving. We'll let the landscape talk about that in more detail. We also have a big issue we know has to do with garbage. I hate to bring it up front, but where the garbage cans go becomes, on almost every development, a huge issue. We have decided to actually try and incorporate an enclosure that's part of the roof structure and to have an area that's pulled away that's dedicated only to the garbage cans. The reason being is that if we claim they're going to put them in the garage, they end up just getting stuck out on the sidewalk or in the alley, and that just becomes more of a problem. So designing something into it initially, we feel is a much stronger position right out the front. These houses all are 2 stories with a 3rd story option, which I'll get to as I go through each story. The front of the house has a small porch, and this is more of your formal entrance off the commons and the pedestrian walkways. That really enters into the great room, real simple concept. The day-to-day, once again, is coming off the back side of the house. So what we have is activity on both sides of the house. Once again, trying to make sure that the alleyway isn't just an abandoned, vehicular spot. It does have people coming and going. So let's go and move on to the next slide. Going upstairs, you'll see that obviously these are 3-bedroom houses. They actually flex up to 4 when we look at the 3rd story, but all are very, standard dimensions. We're not getting anything small. We looked at how to have different combinations for different desires. We've got master bedrooms that are different sizes. We have balconies, all sorts of different options that really fall in the same footprint. We have a center-loaded staircase that is actually more of a chimney effect that'll draw air through and up and out. So trying to incorporate green design and some other things without getting into the weeds too much. Last slide. Getting up to the 3rd story, this is where the massing starts to become how we start to articulate. We talked about the 3 things we were going for, which is density. Obviously going to 0 lot lines helps maximize that. We had looked at having the standard 0 lot line 3-foot setback, similar to how I designed something over at Ironworks. It just didn't net enough space. The buildings became really narrow to have that 3-foot that's fairly arbitrary, so we looked at pushing it all the way out. With that, we needed to figure out an option or a solution for how to gain more private space. And that's where we took advantage of the roof decks. And as you can see, we've got different locations, and it's easy to sort of see the roof decks because they're striped. We're looking at trying to figure out how to give people private space. We don't see a 6-foot fence in this case as being a realistic option on a rooftop. So trying to pre-locate, hit the next slide if you would, and we may need to go back, where these options are. So you take these catbird seats in the top that can either be, in this version we had a reading room. That would be more like a small family room, den option. The other ones had a master bedroom option. There's all these other things that can be very large or very small, and I think we have some square footages that vary from 478 square feet down to 128 square feet, which is this option right here that's just simply a staircase that goes up to the deck. As you can imagine, all the massing then also has a variation front to back, and so taking what is otherwise perceived as a 3-story product, it starts to make smaller 3-story, or visually with a smaller pop-up here, it would almost seem like a 2-story. So that was one very intentional aspect that we were trying to figure out, is how to give privacy in terms of outdoor space, which is really valuable when you get in these higher density places where this isn't an apartment, this is a house. So places you can spend time outside with your family, not just in the commons. That's kind of that reality of what's going on. It's different than across the street where you only have the commons and your front porch. So go ahead and get the next one. Also, as was mentioned, we have what we're referring to as half-plexes. The half-plexes are located at the bookends, if you will, of each of these blocks. all the site is broken into 3 pieces that are relatively equal. And these bookend units, in order to get that density up, we were trying to figure out a way to create a unit that was unique, but also a bit more marketable than a San Francisco stack flat, if you will. We obviously here have a tandem garage for each of the units. The front unit that faces the commons also has an at-grade bonus room that you enter into the front entry, and we see that as either as a family room type location. It could even be a home office, where you have enough space for someone who does want to work at home, or just have a separate at-grade entrance. The other unit that's entered off the street side comes up the staircase and has a small entrance. It has a larger garage by chance. How these units are divided is what makes them a little bit different. As you can see, we have this common wall. All the utilities and what we see as the noise generating elements are actually on this common wall. Staircases, bathrooms, kitchens, those are all brought together, whereas in a typical stacked flat you have building on top of building, in which case the biggest sound generator typically in a unit like that is footfall, which is your neighbor walking on top of your head, and anyone that's been in an apartment knows what that's like when you have the heavy-footed neighbor. This would eliminate that situation entirely. Next slide. Upstairs, these are 2-bedroom, but they're more of a junior suite approach. We see the typical target buyer here as someone who most likely has bought, it's the buildings we bought as a single unit and then only half of it rented, so that's why it's a halfplex. In this case, what we're looking at is having that junior suite, which targets probably someone who's it's not a family-oriented situation, it's more of a roommate. Same thing with the each side of them. So, next slide, please. Oh, that's why I wasn't sure. What do I hit? Oh, there we go. So here's your typical group. As we said, there's 3 groups. Each of these sort of make up each of those pieces of the pie, with the commons and then obviously the alley here. You can see how they basically have these middle units fitting in with these bookends. There is a property line. There would be control joints and such that would allow the expansion and movement of the buildings independently. We didn't want to get too far into that. At this point in the design, what we're really looking at is trying to get some feedback into those main elements of density, massing, and so forth, and not so much into really the elevations per se. It's not like we're coming for the design review, which will come later, that it focuses on the materiality and the specifics of the elevations. At this point, the change in how it's laid out and everything else really is different than what was originally thought of. So here you can see the breakdown on where all the units are. A's are obviously the ones in between. B's and then the C's are behind would be those bookend units. And at this time, I'll move on to some of the just quick massing studies. Kind of looking at what it would look like down the alleys. You can see how the car areas here would be where you pull a car in, the garages, trying to break down what is otherwise a big wall of garages off that alley. And that can be kind of daunting. It also is pretty uninviting if you're walking your dog or doing something else. Whereas if you have these back porches and areas that are, day-to-day activity portals, you can see how that can be activated a little bit more on a day-to-day basis. This is sort of a view in the commons, which is 40 feet across. So from unit to unit, 40 feet. There would be, Keith will get into more of the landscape design, but we're keeping the actual physical porch smaller and trying to have some more of the area be patio-like breakouts that it flexes the space itself. There's no plant material shown here intentionally, just because we didn't want to kind of put a bunch of trees in the way and kind of distract everything. That's why there's no cars and no people either. Just to kind of look at, here's what the buildings are, here's how big they really are, and get some feedback on that. So just some other views looking through the commons on the top view. Here's another view of the commons. and across there. And at this point, I'll hand over the mouse to Keith.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Keith Wilson. I'm a landscape architect, owner of Wilson Design Studio up in Folsom. So this final slide, really, I just want to go through the general site plan a little bit. What we tried to do with this site plan from a landscape perspective is to kind of support the architecture and the massing that Craig's been working with on the layout of the units, specifically because, as Craig mentioned, these units really have two different entries. There's the more homeowner-related entry where people are going to pull up through the alley, and that's where the day-to-day use is going to happen. And then there's actually a front yard component. So as opposed to just across 4th at Metro Square where there's vehicular access in the middle of that breaks up the ability to use that space, in this case what we want to do is grab that common space and create a front yard extension for everybody that lives at this project. So in trying to do that, one of the standard ways that a lot of designers will create a space like this in the middle is to come through the middle of it with one sidewalk, one access point that basically bifurcates that 40 feet in half and then allows longer walkways off of the front doorsteps of each of these units. And what we wanted to do here was actually to create a yard space just outside that front kind of public access for each of these units. So what you're seeing here in each one of these units is a varied approach to extending that typical 4x6 stoop where you just walk out and then all of a sudden you're on a walkway. So we've expanded and widened them. We've extended them out, made sure that the way you approach the house has some meander to it and some kind of experiential quality. And it also allows us to incorporate seat walls, very, very simple kind of building materials where we could create seat walls and create a spot where people can come out and sit down, talk with their neighbors, or hang out. So even though these obviously aren't large lots that allow for big outdoor spaces and private spaces, this really becomes the spot where you can either hang out privately or obviously congregate with the people that live in the neighborhood. What that allows us to do by separating those walks out is to delineate those front yard spaces into really kind of unique landscape extensions. And it encircles a central space in the middle here that in a typical project would probably be just an area of lawn, something that would probably be fairly high water use and fairly high maintenance. But what we'd like to do with this project is incorporate low impact development strategies to take stormwater runoff from the houses and stormwater runoff for the entire site and filter them into this area here. So essentially what you'd have is a working rain garden feature that you'd be able to look out from all these stoops and kind of enjoy the view of. Culminating at the end point here is the area that we talked about earlier. That's kind of one common gazebo or outdoor trellis covered feature. Right now we're showing it with some seat walls, some lower seat walls, and a fire feature, a fire pit, or some kind of area where on a cooler night you can go out and hang out. And then as a culmination of this rain garden here, a working water feature that would actually appear to fall into the rain garden but be recirculated on a separate basis. And all these spaces would have connections to this rain garden from a drainage standpoint, so that water would actually come off and be able to be utilized in the landscape. On the back sides, really the other component of this is trying to create, in a very minimal amount of space, some kind of a green space for people, knowing that when you're coming home from work or from an errand, that's really what you're going to see most of the time. For people who are going to live here, they're going to access it from back here. So Craig alluded originally to the idea that this outdoor parking space, we'd like to do that in a different way than just paving it wall to wall. I mean, either incorporating what we're showing here on this plan is essentially a Hollywood Drive idea where you have 2.5 or 3 foot wide concrete strips. We could also do that in a turf paver material and allow us to put some kind of a low water use, drought tolerant, kind of almost grass-like material, kind of from a wall-to-wall standpoint, to soften that space a little bit. We also have the option in here along one side. We've actually carved up enough space to put in a couple feet of planter and to get a vine up on the wall and a trellis element to help soften that wall. In each of these parking scenarios, on one side of the wall, you've got a 2-story elevation with no glazing on the second, so no window. So it's a larger element. And so on those sides, where we're limited in our ability to do landscape because of just the space, we're looking at doing custom iron pieces or custom artwork pieces that can actually be installed on the wall to help break that up and give it, a different quality. On the side where it's a lower elevation because of the window up above is the side that we would actually incorporate landscape and try to draw that up the wall to kind of help and soften those areas. Also, even though they don't really show very well at this scale, in the in-between areas, in between the spaces where the garage doors go up, are opportunities for us also to do vertical landscape elements. We could do accent pots. We could do just a planter with a vertical element as well, or also incorporate another trellis option to get something vertical ups, because we really don't have very much space laterally to put anything in. So that summarizes the landscape plan. Do we have anything else? I think that's pretty much the project. So. We're all here to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Yes, I have some questions. I like the courtyard, model where, the neighbors can congregate, do things together. I'm noticing, my neighborhood, they do quite a bit of activities outdoors. They're landscaping, and they have a homegrown garden, so it's a real community type setting. And so seeing that there's space for the community to build on their own, so they have an identity and that being passed on in some way. So, providing the support for that or the structure for that, looking at it from that perspective, or looking at some of our neighborhoods and seeing what that looks like, generating some ideas from there. So maybe creating that space, but that it also be something that the community themselves can develop. Because I really like our neighbors doing something to build their own identity that they can continue to meet on a regular basis and do things together. On the alley, my only concern was that being, where cars will be going through, and if you have children, young children who need a place to ride a bicycle and things like that. I don't know how you can take a look at ways to prevent that from happening, or creating a path, just maybe looking at them to say this is going to be your area to ride your bike, and that being reinforced by, the parents or, the neighbors. Just making sure that, because if it's pretty and it's nice and everybody's out there and it's attractive, it's also going to be attracting the children too. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerrero. Commissioner Olson?
Thanks for the presentation, guys. Thanks for sticking it into the end there. I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Levy?
Thank you for the presentation. It was actually very helpful. I did struggle with some of the maps. So one of my questions, and I think I figured it out now, but if we can just clarify. The primary entrances, are there any primary entrances to the, that are on the alley? See, I think I see two, where, and they're your C units.
See, on the C units, so on the half plexes, there is the ability, sorry, if we can switch, do I still drive?
I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
Turn it on, I think. Oh, there we go. Doesn't do it. Where are you? Doesn't want to cooperate. Can you go back a few slides? This is the landscape plan. This is the last slide,
Yeah,
so
this
you go
looks
back
like
to
the PDF. Did you have a separate PowerPoint? No, there it is.
No, don't like PowerPoint. Go back one more, please. One more. One more. There, that's good. So for the half plexes, really we focused the primary entrances here. That element there is really more or less to provide some relief to what is otherwise a pretty harsh corner on the entrance to the building. It also provides this large area that would allow for garbage cans to be removed in this case. These corner units, the bookends, didn't have enough space to actually have those garbage enclosures like we had in the single-family homes. So we opted to put them inside on this. So getting those out, these people have to open their garage to get their garbage cans out, like millions of Americans. And these would actually just have another separate entrance that gets to the garage. You could get, obviously, back to your entrance stoop through your garage if this is your unit, if you're on the C unit.
So the entrance, the primary entrance, the front door for the C units that are in the interior of the project, those are on like a sidewalk?
A commons area, yeah, there's a setback. Yeah, I'll see if I can go for it. I think I can.
Okay, so
yeah, they're off right here, so.
Okay. Okay, that was my question. I was really concerned about having the front door on the alleyways.
No.
And I didn't want people to actually have their front door just on the alleyway. It's a kind of area in transition right now, and there's a lot of foot traffic going through. So
I think that the nature of how the development here really was focused on that. You'll see most likely an immediate change with that, where it won't be such an area of opportunity for people who aren't supposed to be there to hang out. I think that's sort of the intent. There's a lot more light just coming off the buildings and so forth. So even though what an alley is today, that those alleys in particular, I think that just the development of this product, hopefully, you know, it's obviously gentrification and such, but there's a lot more opportunity to put those eyes on the street, which is a phrase overused, we all know, but there is some opportunity there.
the alleyway, I seem to recall that is city property. So
I believe so.
Yeah, these are, public alleys that go way back in time. They've been sort of no man's land, if you will. We actually encourage them to sort of reorient the project to try to make use of those alleys for a couple of reasons. We thought that would be a way to sort of activate, those alleys. But also what it does by taking access from those is it provides an opportunity for more streetscape along 4th and 5th Street and to preserve, on-street parking along those frontages, because otherwise, if units front directly on there and take access, then it's almost all driveway, coming along this, particularly on the 4th Street side. It's something we sort of learned from Metro Place. Over there's quite a bit of driveway and not a lot of parking around the perimeter of the project. So in this particular manner, we preserve that and hopefully activate the alleys at the same time.
The improvements that will be done to the alleys, is that as part of this project? Because I'm assuming these alleys need to be redone. They're pretty old. Or is this a city project that the city will need to undertake before?
No, that is something we'll need to work on with the developer and our engineering group about what the condition of those and whether or not any improvements may be necessary. Fortunately, the rights of way are there and they're wide enough, to serve both an access point for fire department and also for the refuse and recycling. And the fact that they go all the way through is really the key. There's no place to turn around, through here. So by going through the whole block, that provides, easy passage for those vehicles.
Okay. The two existing homes on the project site, I see the answer to that. Those will be removed. There are homes along 5th Street where your project is placed. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Austin?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Generally, I'm a big fan of density, but one of the things that I worry about in the design of this development is that it looks like there was an effort to put so much density that I think that it's a little lacking in green space. I do appreciate that greenery in the commons area, but I do worry that functionally the rain garden won't be as green. It'll feel much more hardscapey than landscapey. And so I hope that, I guess my feedback would be, because this is a workshop setting, that you really put some thought into that. It may require things like putting in annuals, which are not as drought tolerant, but I think it would really add to some of the green space. because what I suspect is that the landscape architect did what he could with stormwater retention, drainage, et cetera, requirements on the site. So that would just be my pretty simple feedback, is that give some thought to landscaping, because it is a really dense site. I think you did put a lot of thought into personal space on the roof, et cetera. And then one more comment that you may want to consider and or address is you did allude to it. I forgot. I think you might have alluded to it. As far as, again, looking at personal space, green space, private space, trellis options, you did mention that they could put it there, but maybe building that in or encouraging that or making that an easy option. And then I've seen that there's a lot of interest in rooftop gardens, which is great, but it's also important to consider that residents, homeowners, whatever, give some consideration to what kind of capacity. So rooftop gardens sound great. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to really damage your property. And so I think that either having some sort of information for residents or factoring that into some of the engineering materials that you use, things like that, would really be a beneficial thing on the site.
Sir, could you come to the mic, please? Can you come to the mic
so we
and
can
speak,
hear
please?
you? Yeah.
Generally, the roof-type gardens are strictly pots and those types of things, and that would be in the CC&Rs, and it would be in the information that we hand out to make sure they know you can't just use the deck and build a little wall around it and water, because that's not what it does. But the goal we did here, and I know you folks are familiar with Metro Place, it's a unique place. It's like a redevelopment area, and I'm sure it was an intentional act. It's open. It feels open. It feels completely different. It feels really, really good. And we wanted to have that open feel. And the use of the alleys, I think, will enhance the neighborhood. But that whole area, in my mind, is amazing because of the open feel and the community feel. And we want to have that kind of feel so that it's not a bunch of walls and wood fences and concrete walls, and just draw everybody in and make this a part of Metro Place and a community. I just think that pays a lot of dividends in the long run.
Commissioner Lee, I'm sorry, Commissioner Austin, are you finished?
No, actually, I think that the landscape architect wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
In response to the comment about the rain garden, I just want to make sure you understood that we see that as an amenity space, not as a low water use necessarily, and native kind of habitat and weedy habitat. As a matter of fact, from a plant material standpoint, we have to be really careful about specifying plant materials that can actually handle drought and being inundated by water. And so most natives per se will be out of the scope of what we could use in a space like that. The idea really is to actually incorporate some semblance of nature in an otherwise kind of urban space that kids and people can actually interact in, and that's why it's focused on that central space that'll kind of anchor the access there. So definitely have a lot of work to do from a design standpoint to engineer the soils to be able to take that water in. We'll be working with our civil engineer to do that, and specifying plant materials very carefully in that area so that it's lush as opposed to a dry kind of wasteland for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a management question, but it has to do with the landscaping. The semi-porous drive aisles, I love the idea of those. Having individual owners maintaining those could likely lead, well, especially if they're in an alleyway, could likely lead to a weedy area or dead patches, likely. Is that going to be part of the maintenance of the entire project, or are individual homeowners going to be responsible for maintenance of vegetation in their drive aisles? I know this is really picky. It's just I'm seeing this as it could be a mess for you if you were going.
We're still going through that, but we're cognizant that we have to make things that are going to be sustained as envisioned, and your point's well taken that sometimes you have to control it. I've used a lot of that actually for areas where fire department wanted to have access to go across with the pavers. It has a good appearance, the drought tolerant I like, but it will carry the load of a vehicle very easily, and I've never had a real problem, but your point's well taken. It has to be maintained properly, and you don't want it to start being an eyesore, particularly in an alley where everybody sees it driving by.
Right. Thank you.
And thank you for your presentation. I'm really hoping that this does help tie in with Metro Place. I know when Metro Place first came in, I was really worried because I wasn't used to high-density type of units, and I kind of thought, who's going to buy these units right off the bridge? And then I went and I looked at them, and they, even as tiny as they are, they just flowed. So, you know, I remember looking down at the backyards, and I thought, wow, you know, that's kind of strange. But when you walk through the house, up through the stairs, I just thought it was, whoever designed it did a really great job. And I see similar aspects to this, and I'm hoping that it will continue that walkway and that community feel and cross 4th Street, because that is an area that needs to be gentrified, and in order to tie all that area, you know, down 5th Street and tie into our Washington Street area, and then ultimately tie into the rivers aspect. So it's a very exciting project. Appreciate it. I guess we'll be having a public hearing scheduled in the future.
Yeah, we have some mechanics to work out on the project, but we would like to return to the Planning Commission as soon as we can. Our engineering division is looking at some of the utilities in the area. As you know, we're looking at Washington also holistically, you know, right now. So we do need to make sure that what's in the ground is adequate for the project. But we are confident that we'll be able to return to the Commission on this, certainly within the next month or two for your further consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will go on to informal discussion. Do we have any? Nothing? I'd like a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great. Thank you.